supported legislation on the floor of the House that is designed to deliver real results and make life better for the American people. At the same period of time, we've also made clear that we will push back against Republican extremism whenever necessary. This week, we continue to see performative politics and political stunts from our Republican colleagues. There are a whole host of issues that we could be working on together. The economy, affordable housing, public safety, national security, the challenges at the border. Extreme MAGA Republicans have chosen to spend the week focused on Secretary Mayorkas and Taylor Swift. That's their agenda. It's performative politics. Marjorie Taylor Greene, who's one of the ringleaders of the extreme MAGA Republicans, is on the floor right now. Not trying to solve a problem for the American people, but once again to bring another frivolous censure resolution designed to inflame and castigate and further divide us. Don't we have enough division in America right now? Don't we have enough challenges that we should be working together to solve? But all we get from the extreme MAGA Republicans are political stunts and performative politics, and it's a shame. Questions?
Mr. Leader, the Senate is obviously still negotiating the supplemental package, which would include border funding in Ukraine and Israel. But Speaker Johnson seems to be not interested in whatever they deliver before the text is even revealed. This despite the fact that there does appear to be enough both Republicans and Democrats to pass the legislation if it were to make it to the House. Have you and your colleagues discussed any effort to try and bring this legislation to the floor outside of the Speaker, a discharge petition, something along those lines, and how urgent do you think this need is? And then secondarily, if it emerges in a situation where the border package is something that Speaker Johnson just won't move on, do you believe that that should be separate from Ukraine and Israel in a separate package?
Well, there are three steps to this process. First, we need to evaluate what comes out of the Senate, if indeed an agreement is reached, have a family discussion about the best way to proceed if there is legislation before us sent over from the United States Senate, and third, enter into a course of action designed to make sure we are delivering real results and solving problems for the American people, as opposed to playing partisan political games. For months, the American people were lectured by the extreme MAGA Republicans about the need to deal with some of the challenges at the border. House Democrats, President Biden, Senate Democrats are ready, we are willing, we are able to work together to address the challenges at the border and fix our broken immigration system. It should be done in a comprehensive, bipartisan, humane fashion. That's President Biden's commitment. That's the Senate Democratic commitment. That's our commitment. Lectured for months about issues at the border. National security funding held up by extreme MAGA Republicans who tied funding for Ukraine, and that's a war that's all about democracy and freedom on the one hand, autocracy and tyranny on the other. And we, as Americans, always stand on the side of democracy and freedom, held up Ukraine funding because of the border, and now they're against the legislative effort that they themselves were apparently for months ago. Why? Because the extreme MAGA Republicans who have taken over the Republican Party are not concerned with solving problems. They are not concerned with making life better for the American people, and they certainly are not concerned with delivering real results. And that's a shame. It's a shame.
Would you be open to separating them, though, sir, if it comes to that?
It's a conversation that we'll have to have as part of a family discussion, and we'll cross that bridge when we get to it.
Thank you.
Just to follow up kind of on what he asked, would you consider trying to get around Speaker Johnson if he doesn't bring it up to the floor? Would you consider trying to work on something like a discharge petition?
Well, we have to evaluate the substance of the legislation before we decide the best procedural course of action.
Can I ask you about SALT for a second? New York Republicans tried to get that provision in the tax bill. It wasn't in there. Number one, do you think the path forward that was proposed in rules today is something you're in favor of? And number two, it's obviously a big issue in New York. We have that special election coming up in a couple of weeks. Do you think it was a failure that New York Republicans couldn't get that in, and think that will help Democrats in Tom Suozzi?
Republicans overall have failed on the question of the state and local tax deduction. Let's remember how this journey started. 2017, Republicans controlled the presidency, the House, and the Senate. And their signature piece of legislation that year was the GOP tax scam, where 83% of the benefits went to the wealthiest 1% in America, and they saddled hardworking American families with $2 trillion worth of debt so they can subsidize the lifestyles of the wealthiest amongst us who weren't even necessarily asking for those dramatic tax cuts. And in the process of passing the GOP tax scam, Republicans detonated the state and local tax deduction, which hurt middle-class families and retirees in New York, in New Jersey, in Connecticut, in Pennsylvania, in Illinois, out west, and at many points in between. Republicans created the problem when they blew up the state and local tax deduction and stuck middle-class families, in some cases, with tax bills that were $10,000 or $20,000 or $25,000 more than they might have otherwise faced. My colleagues from New York came to the Congress last year and said their top priority was going to be to fix the state and local tax deduction that Republicans broke, and they have failed to do it repeatedly. And I have no confidence in their ability to change that situation. It's going to take Democrats dealing with the tax code in a manner that puts middle-class families and hardworking American families first, as opposed to the wealthy, the well-off, and the well-connected, which is what Republicans continue to do.
Thank you, Mr. Leader. So what do you make of Congressman Troy Nell's comments about Congresswoman Cori Bush following the DOJ investigation into whether she misused campaign funds? Now, he called her husband a thug and stated that if she were, quote, loud all the time, she wouldn't need security.
Clearly peddled in racially inflammatory language. He should apologize. It's disgraceful. And as far as I know, the person that he called a thug actually served in the United States military, putting his life on the line as so many of our service women and men do. We've just seen the sacrifice that is made by the men and women of the U.S. military. It's a solemn responsibility that they undertake. And to casually just throw out language, calling people thugs, is shameful.
What's your reaction to this spike, and do you think that there's a legislative fix to what's been happening?
Well, we should look at all available options in terms of partnering with the law enforcement community here on Capitol Hill and across the country to push back against these aggressive swatting incidents that do endanger the lives of the American people, the families of members of Congress, and the responding law enforcement officers themselves, because of lies that are being told to draw law enforcement officers into a situation that could, if gone wrong, result in people being seriously injured. It is an issue that I think we can work on in a bipartisan way. These swatting incidents, of course, are affecting everyone. And members of Congress should be able to serve free of violence, harassment, and intimidation on both sides of the aisle, so we can do what the American people sent us to Washington to do, which is solve problems and deliver real results. Thanks. Back, all the way back. I'll come back to you.
A substantial wave of layoffs hitting big news outlets. Just yesterday, reporters here on the Hill found out their outlet was shutting down for news reports. Curious if you have any reaction to that, if you have any concern about that, given our role in democracy.
Yeah, we should all be concerned about the decline in the ability of the American people to receive information in a clear, a comprehensive, and a transparent fashion from the American media, which is central to our democracy. We have the Article 1 legislative branch. We have the Article 2 executive branch. We have the Article 3 judiciary branch. These are all important institutions connected to the great American democratic experiment. But central to that experiment as well is the freedom of the press and the ability for the American people to receive information, to understand what their representatives are doing, what their judges are doing, what the president is doing in connection with the issues of the day. And I think there are some efforts before the Judiciary Committee to figure out how we might be able to better support local news all across the country. And those are efforts that I hope, continue to lead to something fruitful.
Leader Jeffries, some of your Republican colleagues plan to announce later today a couple of actions against the education department's botched rollout of the new FAFSA form. What, if anything, do you think should be done in response to the delays it's causing?
Well, we should take a look at the situation and make sure that any problems that occurred that create challenges for our young people pursuing assistance in terms of their efforts at higher education are resolved.
Leader Schumer has called for a crackdown on Zyn nicotine pouches. I'm curious if you think there should be a crackdown on Zyn.
Haven't spent a lot of time on the issue, but I look forward to looking into it.
Back to the border a little bit. Obviously, you've got Speaker Johnson and a lot of House Republicans calling this dead-on arrival in the House. Obviously, there's still an effort, especially once the text gets out, to try to pass it. But there are also some Democrats in the House, progressives, and some in the Senate as well, who are raising concerns about some of these provisions. They worry that President Biden might sell out immigrant communities. They've said that in some press conferences. What's your message to those folks and their concerns on this package?
We have a broken immigration system that we need to fix. President Biden has asked for the tools to fix it. And there's an ongoing discussion that hopefully will result in a legislative product that we can all evaluate on our side that should be consistent with two important American values. First, We are a nation of immigrants, and that will continue to be important to our future competitiveness. Second, we are a nation anchored in the rule of law. And I certainly don't think that it is responsible for extreme MAGA Republicans to say that on such an issue of importance relative to addressing and fixing the challenges at the border, that anything is dead on arrival before they've even had an opportunity to review it. That is not responsible legislating. That's playing political games. And the American people are sick of it. And the American people should be sick of it. Because the American people can see with their own eyes that there are real challenges at the border. And we should be working together to solve those challenges, not play political games.
Last fall, Democrats had a censure resolution introduced against Marjorie Taylor Greene. In light of today's news, do you plan on bringing that back?
We haven't had that discussion yet. Thanks. I'll stay over here.
In light of last night with the vote on the tax bill and in light of some other recent votes, it appears the role of the House minority has changed in a way that the House has become more Senate-y than the Senate, given that most of the substantive bills coming to the floor now require 2/3. In the past, the House minorities kind of typically played the role of the Washington Generals versus the Harlem Globetrotters. What changes have you made or has changed in your job since this has become a government by suspension calendar over here?
Well, it's been clear to us from the very beginning of this Congress that if we're going to deliver real results for the American people, it's going to require Democrats being willing to continue to exercise common sense and find bipartisan common ground in order to solve problems and deliver real results. That was the case with respect to avoiding a catastrophic default on our nation's debt for the first time in American history that would have crashed our economy and hurt the American people. That has been the case on 3 different occasions where we were able to avoid a harmful government shutdown because House Democrats stepped up to deliver real results for the American people and fund the government in a manner that provides for their health, safety, and economic well-being. That certainly was the case with respect to passing a tax package that strengthened the low-income housing tax credit and the child tax credit. That will continue to be the case for the balance of the 118th Congress.
Do you feel, though, that Democrats have taken advantage of this new leverage? That you guys are playing hardball enough, given that you guys are carrying most of these bills?
Every single bill that we've been able to pass has been done in a way that is consistent with our values, based on a standard of evaluation that is connected to making life better for the American people. And if the bill that is before us is designed to improve the quality of life of hardworking American families, we are going to help shape it, support it, and get it over the finish line.
Thank you. It's the Black History Month, and you're ahead of South Carolina primary. In your role as leader, what is your message to Black voters in the United States?
Well, with respect to Black History Month, let me simply just say Black history is American history, and going all the way back to 1619, we have been an important part of the American story, and that will continue. In connection with the South Carolina primary, there's not much that I can say about it from this podium on the governmental side, but I just expect that voters in South Carolina, as has been the case in every other state, should participate, go go to the polls, exercise your right to vote, evaluate the records of all candidates, and recognize that they have the power, not just African American voters, but all voters have the power to shape America's future. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, or Mr. Leader, excuse me. I wanted to ask specifically about your response to Representative Emmer calling for an ethics investigation into Representative Omar yesterday.
Yeah, I haven't seen that call, so I have no comment on it right now. Back. Oh, sorry. Then I get you in Kevin next.
With respect to the tax bill last night, some analysts are looking at it and saying, change is good for now, but we're going to be dealing with this again pretty soon in 2025. I know that's a long way down the road, but if you just look forward a little bit, what does the bipartisan nature of the bill, as you mentioned, the Democratic support for the bill, and the room for work there, tell you about kind of the pending things that Congress has to address sooner than later?
Well, from our point of view, it is clear that we need to go further with respect to the child tax credit. In 2021, under the leadership of President Biden, Speaker Pelosi, Leader Schumer, Democrats in the House and the Senate were able to pass a transformational child tax credit that benefited middle-class families, working families, and low-income families all at the same time in a tremendous and decisive way. We should build upon that moving forward, and that's what House Democrats plan to do at the first available opportunity. Kevin?
I'd like to circle back to SALT. In the event that this does get to the floor, would you keep it open to your Democrats to vote for the rule if they want to advance this, particularly some in New York that might want to see this come up? And how would you vote should it actually get to a up or down vote?
We have to evaluate the actual proposal to strengthen and restore the state and local tax deduction before we make any procedural decisions about the best path forward. Before the Ways and Means Committee, with respect to the tax bill that was on the floor yesterday, there was an amendment that was offered by Congressman Bill Pascrell that would have raised the state and local tax deduction cap from $10,000, which is outrageous, imposed by the former twice impeached president and his MAGA extremists in 2017. That amendment would have raised the state and local tax deduction cap from $10,000 to $60,000. That is based on legislation that allegedly is supported by the New York Republicans. And so it seems to me that we should evaluate whether meaningful progress is being made on the state and local tax deduction based on the legislation that the New York Republicans themselves submitted, which raises the cap from $10,000 to $60,000. It's not my standard, that's their standard. And apparently they are for it before they're against it. Every single Democrat on the Ways and Means Committee voted for the Pascrell Amendment. Every single Republican voted against it. That's a record that eventually is going to be litigated before the people of New York State and the people of this nation. Thank you, everyone.